Asterisk. In a quiet cemetery on the edge of Riverton, one grave stood bare. No flag, no flowers, no name on the memorial wall. It belonged to Marcus Ellsworth, a black war hero who once saved 12 soldiers in a single night, and was erased from history. But one stubborn teenager, a battle-scarred veteran, and a dog named Shadow refused to let the truth stay buried. They uncovered a decades-old betrayal, fought a city that wanted to forget, and faced men willing to threaten them in broad daylight. All for one thing: to put a flag where it should have been all along. This isn't just about a grave. It's about honor, justice, and the kind of courage that doesn't make headlines. Until someone dares to tell the story, if you believe some truths are worth fighting for, you're in the right place. So hit subscribe and let's uncover it together. Asterisk. Sunrise in Riverton was rarely beautiful. At least, not for those living on the south side of town, where the sun was swallowed up by crumbling brick buildings and rusted smokestacks long before it could ever touch the streets. There were no glass towers catching amber light, no rich smell of freshly roasted coffee drifting out from boutique cafes. Here, morning came in shades of cold gray, wrapped in damp mist mixed with the exhaust of city buses and the stale scent of trash left from the night before. Jaden Brooks sat on the concrete steps of his rundown apartment building, his sneakers worn thin at the solace. He chewed on a cheap pack of crackers, eyes fixed on the street. His mother, Denise Brooks, had just left for her shift at the hospital, switching from nights to days. She turned back long enough to say, "Don't wander too far, Jay, and remember, don't get into trouble." He only nodded. In Riverton, getting into trouble sometimes meant nothing more than existing in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong skin color. Across the street, a thin figure sat leaning against a lamppost. Samuel "Sam" Turner. His hair was silver and ragged, his skin weathered by years of sun and wind, his hands rough and cracked. Lying beside him was Shadow, a retired service dog, black fur streaked with gray, one ear ragged from an old injury. The two of them looked like living statues that everyone had agreed not to notice. Sam didn't beg. He simply sat there, a battered military cap in front of him, holding a few scattered coins. Shadow lay still with his head resting on Sam's leg, eyes half closed, but his ears twitched now and then. An instinct burned into him from years of service. A tarnished metal tag hung from his collar, its letters worn down so much you could barely read them. A woman in a fur coat walked past, her gaze flicking over Sam and Shadow before darting away. Her heels struck the pavement faster, as if staying even 1 second longer might soil her in some way. Jaden saw it all, and he knew exactly what he was looking at, what his mother called the invisible distances, the kind you couldn't measure with a ruler, but heavy enough to make the air feel thick. He headed toward Riverton Central Park. In one quiet corner, there was a grave unremarkable, often overlooked. He'd passed it countless times, but today, for some reason, he stopped. The headstone was weathered, the engraved letters softened by years of rain and wind. Marcus Ellsworth, 1947197. Oh, no flowers. No photo, not even the small American flag that every other veteran's grave in Riverton had. Just a cold, lonely slab of stone. Before Jaden could think more about it, the crunch of shoes on gravel sounded behind him. He turned to see a tall man in his 50s, wearing an immaculate gray suit. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his polished leather shoes catching what little light the morning gave. The man stopped at the grave, looking down with an expression Jaden couldn't quite name. It wasn't grief, nor respect. More like the faint smirk someone gives to an old object they've already decided isn't worth keeping. This was Richard "Rick" Halloran, owner of one of Riverton's biggest real estate firms, famous for turning poor neighborhoods into luxury districts. Jaden had seen his face on billboards, smiling under the slogan, "Bringing the future to Riverton." But the cold detachment in his eyes now made Jaden's skin prickle. Rick Halloran stood there for a few seconds, then walked away. No flower, no salute, no sign of recognition. As he left, Jaden noticed Sam Turner standing at a distance, his gaze locked on the man. It wasn't simple curiosity. It was something heavier, something like anger that had been forced to sit in silence for far too long. Jaden walked over to him. "You know this guy?" he asked, nodding at the stone. Sam hesitated. "Yeah, kid. I know him. More than I wish I had to." He looked down, rubbing Shadow's neck. His fingers traced the rough fur like they were searching for a memory. Buried deep inside. Beyond the park, the city was waking fully, horns blaring, voices calling, people rushing without looking at each other. But here, in this corner, there was only Jaden, Sam, Shadow, and the flagless grave of Marcus Ellsworth. Jaden didn't know it yet, but the moment he stopped at that headstone was the moment he stepped into a story that would change everything. One about war, prejudice, loyalty, and justice that came far too late. The Riverton Diner didn't look like much. Its neon sign flickered between open and ope, because the N had died years ago. The place smelled faintly of burnt coffee and fryer grease, and the vinyl booths had that permanent stickiness that no amount of scrubbing could cure. It was exactly the kind of place where nobody asked too many questions, and Sam Turner seemed to like it that way. Jaden pushed the door open, the little bell above it jingling, and spotted Sam right away. He was hunched over a chipped mug, steam curling upward into the pale light. Shadow was curled under the table, his big black body pressed tight against Sam's boots. Jaden hesitated. He wasn't sure why he'd come, maybe curiosity, maybe something else. But he slid into the booth across from Sam without asking. Sam's eyes lifted, the pale blue of them clouded and cautious. "You following me now, kid?" "Just wanted to talk," Jaden said, glancing down at Shadow, who was watching him with the alert, steady gaze of an animal who'd seen too much to be easily fooled. "About the grave, Marcus Ellsworth." Sam's jaw tightened. He took a slow sip of coffee, the mug trembling just enough for Jaden to notice. "Not much to say," Sam muttered. "He's gone. Been gone a long time. But you said he was a hero." That word seemed to catch in the air between them. Sam's eyes shifted away, staring at a point somewhere beyond the diner window, at nothing and everything. "Saved 12 men in a single night," Sam said finally, his voice low. "Pulled them out under fire, one by one. Took a bullet in the leg and kept going." "You'd think that'd count for something." Jaden leaned forward. "So why doesn't he have a flag on his grave?" "Every other vet does." Sam let out a laugh, sharp and humorless. "Because the people in charge didn't think he was the right kind of hero." He glanced at Jaden, the weight of the words hanging there. "And some folks still don't." Jaden felt something hot in his chest. Anger, maybe. Or shame, though he couldn't say why. He wanted to ask more, but Sam's face had closed off again, like a door slammed shut. "Look, kid. Curiosity's a dangerous thing in this town," Sam said. "And this," he tapped the table, "this isn't your fight." Jaden didn't answer. The truth was, he wasn't so sure about that. The Brooks apartment sat on the 4th floor of a building that had seen better decades. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew and overcooked cabbage from the neighbor's kitchen. Inside, the place was cramped but clean, though every piece of furniture looked like it had been bought secondhand. Denise Brooks came in just after sunset, her scrubs wrinkled, her hair pulled back in a fraying bun. She looked bone-tired, but still offered her son a weary smile. "Hey baby, you eat yet?" Jaden shrugged. "Not really. Was waiting for you." They ended up eating together at the small kitchen table, 2 bowls of instant noodles with some wilted greens thrown in. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and the steam rising from the bowls felt almost like comfort. Jaden told her about meeting Sam again, about the diner, about Marcus Ellsworth's grave. Denise listened quietly at first, but when he asked why a veteran might not get a flag, her eyes flickered with something fear, maybe, or memory. Jay, some things you don't need to go poking at, she said softly. Especially things tied up with the government or the military. People get hurt asking the wrong questions, but Mom, no. Her voice was firm now. You're 14. You've got enough to deal with school, staying safe. Leave the rest alone. Jaden didn't argue, but later, lying in bed, he stared at the ceiling and thought about Sam's words. Not the right kind of hero. He didn't know exactly what that meant yet, but he had a feeling it wasn't something he could just let go. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Jaden found himself back at the park. The trees were shedding leaves in lazy spirals, their colors dulled by Riverton's gray sky. Near the bench by the war memorial, Sam sat with Shadow at his feet, the dog's broad head resting on his paws. Jaden walked up slowly. Shadow's ears twitched at his approach, and then the dog was on his feet, tail giving one measured wag, not friendly exactly, but acknowledging him. Morning, Jaden said. Sam grunted something that might have been a greeting. Before Jaden could sit, a man staggered toward them from the sidewalk, a big guy in a dirty jacket, eyes glassy with whatever he'd been drinking since dawn. He stopped a few feet away, staring at Sam like he'd just found someone to blame for the state of the world. You owe me money, the man slurred. Sam didn't even look up. Don't know you. The man stepped closer, his voice rising. You vets think you're better than everyone. Sitting here with your damn dog like you're guarding the president. Shadow moved, then smooth and silent. He stepped between Sam and the man, his stance low, muscles tight, eyes fixed. A low, steady growl rumbled from deep in his chest, the kind of sound that told you there was no bluff in it. The drunk froze, his bravado draining away. Yeah, whatever, he muttered, backing off. Jaden let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He's intense. Sam's hand found Shadow's neck, fingers pressing into the thick fur. He's trained to protect, learned that with Marcus. Jaden sat down beside him. He belonged to Marcus? Yeah. Sam's gaze softened as it landed on the dog. Got him as a pup from the canine unit before we shipped out. Smartest damn animal I ever met. Saved Marcus's life once, in Da Nang. Enemy fire caught them by surprise. Shadow knocked him down before the bullet hit. Took the hit himself. Jaden stared at the dog, imagining him younger, faster, in the middle of a war zone. Shadow looked back at him with those amber eyes that seemed older than any human's. When Marcus didn't make it home, Sam said quietly, I promised I'd take care of him. Guess we're both just trying to keep our promises. The next time they met, Sam had something in his hand. He held it out to Jaden without a word. It was a photograph, old and curled at the edges. In it, a group of soldiers stood in front of a sandbag wall. They were dusty, smiling, young in the way only. People who believe they're invincible can be. In the center was Marcus Ellsworth, tall and broad-shouldered, with Shadow smaller than perched on his lap like he owned the spot. Jaden traced a finger over the image. He looks happy. Wasn't always, Sam said. But that day, yeah, we just made it back from a hell of a run. Lost good men that week, but Marcus, he pulled more of us out than anyone thought possible. Jaden flipped the photo over. On the back, in faded handwriting, Da Nang, 1969, 3rd Platoon, Bravo Company. You keep this the whole time? Jaden asked. Sam's mouth tightened. Some folks want to forget. I don't. Forget or erase. Jaden said. Sam looked at him then, something unreadable in his eyes. You're sharper than you look, kid. Jaden felt a jolt of determination. Whatever the reason was for that empty flagpole by Marcus's grave, it wasn't just oversight. Someone had decided it would be that way. And he was going to find out why. The Riverton Public Library was one of the few buildings in the South Side that hadn't been gutted by time or neglect. Its brick facade was worn but solid, and the tall windows let in thin strips of gray daylight. Jayden liked the place. It smelled of paper and quiet, and nobody looked twice at you as long as you weren't loud. He made a beeline for the back corner, where an old desktop computer hummed like it was working too hard just to exist. The keyboard keys were shiny with wear. He typed in Marcus Ellsworth and hit search. At first, nothing. Then a handful of results popped up. Most were just digitized obituaries and tiny blurbs from old newspapers. One headline caught his eye: "Local soldier killed in action. Details pending. Riverton Gazette, June 1970." He clicked. The article was barely 3 paragraphs. It mentioned Marcus's age, his unit, and that he died during an operation in Da Nang. There was no mention of medals, no quotes from comrades, no details beyond the bare fact of his death. Jayden frowned. Even in other obituaries from the same year, there were at least flowery sentences about bravery, sacrifice, the ultimate price. But here, Marcus's life had been stripped down to a date, a place, and the fact that he was gone. He scribbled notes in his spiral notebook, adding question marks next to every blank space in the story. On impulse, he searched for 3rd Platoon Bravo Company, Da Nang, 1969. This time the results were a mix of military archives and news reports. Some mentioned heavy fighting. Others hinted at disciplinary investigations, but never explained further. One document, a scanned letter from a military office, had whole sections blacked out. It was like trying to see a picture through fog. You could sense the shapes but not the details. Jayden leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. If the official records were this vague, it meant one of two things. Nobody cared enough to record more. Or someone didn't want the truth recorded at all. Either way, it made him want to dig deeper. It was late afternoon when Jayden left the library, his notebook stuffed into his backpack. The air had cooled, and the wind carried that damp smell that meant rain was coming. He was cutting through the edge of the park when he saw him, Rick Halloran, the man from the grave. The man in the expensive suit, except today it was a tailored navy overcoat. He was standing by the war memorial, speaking into his phone. When he saw Jayden, his eyes narrowed slightly. Rick ended the call and stepped toward him with the measured pace of someone who was used to people making room. "You're Denise Brooks's boy, aren't you?" he said. His voice was smooth, but there was an edge to it, like a knife hidden in velvet. Jayden's mouth went dry. "Yeah, I hear you've been spending time with Samuel Turner," Rick continued, "and asking questions about Marcus Ellsworth." Jayden's fingers tightened on his backpack strap. "So?" Rick smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Curiosity is admirable in moderation. But in this case, I'd suggest you find a more productive hobby." "That sounds like a threat," Jayden said, surprising himself. Rick chuckled softly. "No, son. A piece of advice. Some stories are better left where they've been buried. Digging them up tends to attract trouble. And trouble has a way of finding people who can't handle it." He took a step closer, the smell of expensive cologne cutting through the damp air. "I'd hate to see you or your mother dragged into something you don't understand." Jayden held his gaze, but his pulse was racing. Rick gave him one last small smile and walked away, his shoes clicking against the path. Jayden stood there for a long moment, the warning echoing in his head. But underneath the unease was something else, something sharper. If Rick Halloran wanted him to stop, it meant he was getting close to something worth finding. Saturday afternoons in Riverton Central Park were usually quiet, the kind of quiet that belonged to old men feeding pigeons and joggers, zoning out with their headphones in. But today, the air felt heavier, charged in a way Jayden couldn't quite explain. He spotted Sam Turner from a distance, sitting on his usual bench beneath the warped oak tree. Shadow was sprawled at his feet, head on his paws, looking like nothing could bother him. Jaden was halfway across the lawn when a burst of laughter cut through the air. 3 guys late teens, maybe early 20s, were striding toward Sam. They wore designer sneakers and varsity jackets, the kind of clothes that said their parents never let them want for anything. One of them, a tall blonde with a jaw that looked like it had been carved for smugness, pointed at Sam and said something that made the others laugh harder. Jaden slowed. Watching, the blonde one stopped in front of the bench, towering over Sam. "Park's for people, old man, not for whatever you are." Sam didn't even look up. "Bench is public. Move along." The blonde guy's smile widened, all teeth. "You hear that, boys? Public. Guess that means we can sit here too." He dropped down beside Sam, spreading his arms across the back of the bench like he owned it. The other 2 flanked him, boxing Sam in. Shadow lifted his head, eyes narrowing, a low rumble starting in his throat. "Easy, boy," Sam murmured, resting a hand on the dog's neck. But the blonde guy leaned forward, eyes glinting. "That thing. Even safe? Looks like it's one twitch away from biting someone. Bet you don't even have the papers for him." "Bet you don't have the papers for your mouth either," Sam said flatly. Jaden stepped closer before he could think. "Hey, leave him alone." All 3 heads turned toward him. The blonde grinned like he'd just found a new toy. "And who's this? The vet's little charity case?" "I said, leave him alone," Jaden repeated, his voice sharper this time. One of the others, shorter but built like a wall, stood and took a step toward Jaden. "What are you gonna do, kid?" Jaden's pulse was pounding, but he didn't back up. "I'm gonna remember your faces." The tall one laughed, standing now, his friends falling in behind him. "You hear that? Little man's gonna remember." "US, that's supposed to scare me?" Before Jaden could answer, Shadow was on his feet, moving forward just enough to make the guys hesitate. His growl was deep, steady, the kind of sound that spoke of training and intent. The blonde lifted his hands in mock surrender. "Relax, Suyo, we're leaving." He shot Sam a final smirk. "Park's going to look different soon, old man. Enjoy your bench while you can." They walked off, their laughter trailing behind them. Jaden dropped onto the bench beside Sam, adrenaline still buzzing in his veins. Who were they? "Just noise," Sam said. But his gaze was fixed on where they'd gone, and Jaden didn't miss the tension in his jaw. "They knew you," Jaden said. "They know what I am," Sam corrected. And that's enough for some folks. For a while, they sat in silence. The park settled back into its lazy rhythm, but Jaden's mind was still spinning. What did he mean about the park looking different? Sam snorted. "Halloran's been trying to get the city to redevelop this area for years. Tear down the memorial, put in some shiny new condos. Those boys? Daddy's money and daddy's opinions." Jaden thought about Rick Halloran's warning, the way his voice had wrapped around the word buried. They're connected to him? "Everything's connected to him," Sam said. He reached into his coat and pulled out something small, passing it to Jaden. It was a military patch, frayed at the edges. A snarling black dog's head against a faded green background. "That's Shadow's old unit," Sam said. "Marcus had the same one sewn on his vest. We were there the night." He trailed off, eyes distant. "We lost more than half the platoon that night, but Marcus, he wouldn't leave anyone behind. Kept going back, even when the choppers were pulling out. Pulled me out too, though I told him to leave me." Jaden turned the patch over in his hands. "Why isn't this in some museum, or in his family's hands?" Sam's mouth twisted. "Because there's people who'd rather Marcus Ellsworth be just another name on a list. No stories, no medals, no flag." Jaden felt the heat in his chest again, that mix of anger and disbelief. "That's not right." "No," Sam said. "It's not." The next few days, Jaden couldn't get the encounter or the patch out of his head. At school, he found himself drifting during math, staring at the patch hidden in his pocket. When the final bell rang, he went straight to the library. He started with the city archives this time, scrolling through digitized council meeting notes. It was slow work, but after an hour, he found something. A brief mention of a proposal to relocate the Riverton War Memorial in 1971, sponsored by a councilman named Robert Halloran. Rick's father. The proposal had been tabled indefinitely after public protest, but the notes didn't say why. Jaden printed the page and stuffed it into his backpack. On the way home, he took a detour through the park. Sam wasn't there, but Shadow was lying alone by the bench, head on his paws. He lifted it when Jaden approached, tail thumping once. "Where's your guy?" Jaden asked, crouching to scratch behind Shadow's ear. A voice behind him answered, "Talking to someone who doesn't want you here." Jaden turned to see Rick Halloran standing a few feet away, hands in his coat pockets. The man looked almost casual, but there was nothing relaxed about his eyes. "You're persistent," Rick said. "I can respect that. But you need to understand digging into certain histories doesn't change them. It just puts you in the crossfire." "I'm not scared of you," Jaden said, though his pulse betrayed him. Rick smiled thinly. "You should be scared of what I represent, not me, this city. It doesn't run on truth. It runs on the stories people agree to tell. Marcus Ellsworth isn't part of that story anymore." Jaden felt his throat tighten. Maybe he should be. For a second, something flickered in Rick's expression: annoyance, maybe even doubt, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "Go home, Jaden, while you still can." He walked away without looking back, leaving Jaden with Shadow and the sound of the wind rustling through the oak leaves. Jaden stood there for a long time, staring at the war memorial. The stone faces carved into it looked back at him, unblinking. Somewhere beneath the surface, he could feel it, the heat of a fire catching, and he knew he wasn't going to stop feeding it. The Riverton City Hall smelled like old carpet and polished brass. Jaden had never been inside before, and everything about it felt heavier. The ceilings were high, the hallways too wide, the kind of place that seemed designed to make people feel small. He'd rehearsed what he was going to say on the bus ride over. "Keep it simple. Ask for public records. Don't give them a reason to turn you away." The records clerk was a thin woman with glasses that made her eyes look twice their normal size. She didn't smile when Jaden approached the counter. "I'm looking for military service records," he began, trying to sound older than he was. "For Marcus Ellsworth. He was from Riverton. Served in." The woman cut him off with a sigh. "Military records aren't stored here. And even if they were, you'd need to be next of kin to request them. I'm just asking for anything public. Newspaper clippings, commendations." "Son," she said, leaning forward slightly, "we don't have what you're looking for." Jaden's stomach sank. He knew a brush off when he heard one. "Is there a reason?" He pressed dot before she could answer. A familiar voice came from behind him. "Because some people understand boundaries." Jaden turned. Rick Halloran was standing there in a charcoal suit, looking like he'd stepped out of a campaign poster. The clerk's posture straightened instantly. "Mr. Halloran," she said warmly. "Karen," he replied, his tone smooth as glass. "I'll take it from here." The clerk vanished into a back office, leaving Jaden face to face with the man who'd warned him more than once to walk away. Rick smiled faintly. "Persistent as ever, I see. I just want to know why Marcus Ellsworth doesn't have a flag on his grave," Jaden said. "And I've told you some things are better left where they are," Rick replied. "But since you're determined to ignore good advice, let me make it clearer. There's no record here because nothing here concerns you. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're going to get." Rick stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Do you know what happens to people who make the wrong enemies in this city? They disappear. Not literally, most of the time. But their lives get smaller. Doors close. Opportunities vanish. And no one notices because no one cares. Jaden's fists clenched. You think that's going to scare me? Rick studied him for a long moment, then gave a short, humorless laugh. Not yet, but it will. He turned and walked away, leaving Jaden standing in the echo of his own anger. Outside City Hall, the air felt colder. Jaden started toward the bus stop, his mind a tangle of frustration and questions. He almost didn't notice the man leaning against the brick wall until he spoke. "You're the kid asking about Marcus," the man said. He was in his late 60s, wearing a faded army jacket and a ball cap pulled low. Jaden hesitated. "Yeah. Who are you?" "Name's Frank Dawson. Served with Marcus. Sam Turner's a friend." Jaden stepped closer. "Why didn't Sam tell me about you?" Frank shrugged. "Sam doesn't talk to many people these days. Can't blame him. But I heard you were looking for answers." "I am," Jaden said. "Nobody wants to give them to me." "That's because the truth's messy," Frank said. "And dangerous, depending on who you tell it to." They started walking toward the edge of the plaza. Frank lit a cigarette, the smoke curling into the cold air. "Marcus saved my life. More than once. But he also pissed off the wrong people. In command. They didn't like that he spoke up about how certain missions were run, about who was left behind. And they sure as hell didn't like that a black soldier was making them look bad." Jaden felt that same heat in his chest again. "So they erased him. Piece by piece," Frank said. "First from the paperwork, then from the memorials. Flag's just the last part. Why didn't anyone fight it?" Frank stopped walking. "Some of us tried. But the Hallorans, they've had their hands in Riverton politics for decades. You go up against them, you'd better be ready to lose more than a fight." They reached the curb. Frank dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his boot. "If you're serious about this, talk to the others. The ones who were there that night in Da Nang. They'll tell you what Marcus did. How do I find them?" Jaden asked. Frank handed him a slip of paper with 3 names and a phone number. Carefully. That night, back in his room, Jaden stared at the list. Each name felt like a door waiting to be opened if he could find the key. Somewhere between fear and excitement, he realized something. He wasn't just chasing the story anymore. He was stepping into a war. And the walls around him were higher than he'd thought. The wind cut sharp through Riverton that Sunday morning, chasing most people indoors. But Jaden was out early, headed toward the park with his backpack and the slip of paper Frank had given him tucked into his pocket. Sam was already there, hunched on the bench with Shadow leaning against his leg like a furry sentinel. His breath came out in clouds, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "You're up early," Sam said when Jaden sat down. "I met someone," Jaden replied. "Frank Dawson. He gave me some names. People who were with Marcus that night." Sam's expression didn't change, but his shoulders relaxed a little. "Frank's good people. Tough but good." "I'm going to call them," Jaden said. "I want to know everything." Sam gave him a long look, then shook his head. "You've got guts, kid. Not sure if that's bravery or just not knowing what you're in for." Shadow nuzzled Jaden's hand, warm despite the cold. Jaden smiled faintly. "Guess we'll find out." They didn't get far into the conversation before a shout rang out from across the park. A small crowd had gathered near the playground, where an older man had collapsed in the snow. Jaden was already on his feet, running toward the scene. When they got closer, he saw the man was wearing a battered military coat, his face pale, lips tinged blue. A woman knelt beside him, frantic, but no one else seemed to know what to do. "Call an ambulance." Jaden yelled, dropping to his knees. Sam crouched on the other side, already unzipping the man's coat. "Stay with me, Bill," he said, and Jaden realized Sam knew him. Shadow circled the group, barking once, sharp and commanding, as if to keep people back and give them space. Within minutes, the siren wailed in the distance. When the paramedics arrived, Sam and Jaden stepped aside, watching as they loaded Bill onto a stretcher. The woman who'd been with him, his daughter, maybe turned to Sam. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick. "If you hadn't been here." Sam just nodded, his gaze following the ambulance until it disappeared. The next day, Jaden found himself back in the park again, this time with a small paper bag in hand. He'd stopped by the diner for coffee and 2 breakfast sandwiches, one for him, one for Sam. They ate in silence for a while, watching Shadow nose around in the frosted grass. "Bill's stable," Sam said finally. "Daughter called me this morning," Jaden smiled. "That's good." Sam glanced at him. "Noticed you didn't run the other way when things got messy yesterday." "I'm not really the running kind," Jaden said. Sam chuckled, the sound rare enough to make Jaden grin. Later that week, Jaden was cutting through downtown when he saw something unexpected. Rick Halloran was standing outside a cafe, not in a suit this time, but in a dark coat, hands shoved in his pockets. And beside him, of all people, was Bill, the man they'd helped. Rick was holding the cafe door open for him, speaking low. Bill nodded once, then headed inside. Jaden slowed his pace, curiosity pricking at him. Rick noticed and gave a short nod in greeting, more acknowledgement than warning this time. 2 days later, Jaden got the explanation. Sam told him that Rick had paid Bill's hospital bill in full. "Why?" Jaden asked, surprised. Sam shrugged. "Maybe he remembered Bill from the service. Maybe he's trying to buy himself some peace. People are complicated." Jaden thought about that. Rick Halloran was still the man who'd tried to scare him off, but maybe he wasn't just that. The real turning point came a week later, when a little boy wandered into the street chasing a runaway soccer ball. The traffic light had just turned green. Jaden didn't even have time to shout before Shadow bolted, crossing the distance in seconds. The dog reached the boy and nudged him hard with his shoulder, sending him stumbling safely back to the curb just as a car screeched past. The boy's mother scooped him up, crying and thanking Sam over and over, though it was Shadow who had done the saving. Rick Halloran, who happened to be walking by, stopped to watch the scene. His expression was unreadable, but he stood there until the mother and child had gone, then glanced at Sam. "Good dog," he said simply, before walking away. That night, as Jaden sat on the bench with Sam and Shadow, he felt the shift, small, maybe even fragile, but real. In a city built on invisible walls, sometimes the smallest cracks came from moments no one planned, and maybe, just maybe, those cracks could be widened. It started with a phone call. Jaden was at home, bent over his history homework, when the landline rang. Hardly anyone used it anymore, which was why his mother picked it up with a frown. "Jaden," she said after a moment, "it's for you, some man named Walter Pierce." He took the phone, pressing it to his ear. "Hello? Frank Dawson. Gave me your number," the voice said, rough, older, carrying that faint rasp of a lifetime of cigarettes. "Said you were asking about Marcus Ellsworth." Jaden sat up straighter. "Yes, sir." "I don't do phone talk," Pierce said. "Too many ears. You want to hear what really happened to Marcus? Meet me tomorrow, 8 a.m. behind the old grain warehouse on 9th. Don't be late." The line went dead. The warehouse was a hulking shape against the pale winter sky, its rusted siding peeling away in places like old paint. Jaden pulled his hood up against the wind and spotted a figure leaning against the loading dock. A tall, wiry man with a gray beard and eyes that seemed to take in everything. "You must be Pierce," Jaden said. Pierce nodded once. "You've got his look, you know, Marcus, same fire in the eyes. Dangerous thing to have." Jaden didn't know what to say to that, so he stayed quiet. Pierce lit a cigarette, the ember flaring in the wind. "Da Nang, 1970, 3rd Platoon. Bravo Company, we were ordered to pull back." The place was crawling enemy fire from all sides. Anyone with sense was running for the choppers. He took a long drag, exhaled smoke, But not Marcus, he went back. First time he dragged out. Corporal Givens, leg shot to hell. Second time, it was Sergeant Lewis burned bad. Third time it was Sam Turner. Jaden felt his chest tighten. Sam never told me that. Sam doesn't talk about that night. We lost 23 men. And when Marcus finally came out the last time, he didn't make it 30 yards before they cut him down. Pierce's voice hardened. He should have had the Medal of Honor. Hell, at least the Silver Star. But you know what the paperwork said. Actions not in line with direct orders. Jaden's fists clenched. Because he went back? Because he embarrassed the wrong officer. And because he was black. The words hit like a stone in the gut. Pierce stubbed his cigarette out on the concrete. 2 weeks later, the recommendation for his medal vanished. Next thing we knew, his name barely made it into the hometown paper. Jaden took out his notebook. Do you have proof? Pierce hesitated, then pulled a folded envelope from his jacket. I kept this copy of the original recommendation before it disappeared. Not official anymore, but it's something. Jaden unfolded it with care. There it was in typewriter ink faded to brown, the commendation for Marcus Ellsworth, citing extraordinary heroism at risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. At the bottom, the approving officer's signature. And then a second page, a terse typed note from a higher-up rescinding the nomination, per conduct inconsistent with chain of command. It made Jaden's skin crawl. Why give this to me? He asked. Pierce's gaze was steady. Because Frank says you're stubborn enough to do something with it. But you'd better be ready. The Hallorans aren't going to let this see daylight without a fight. Jaden left the meeting with the envelope zipped into his backpack, his mind racing. This was it, the piece of proof he'd been chasing. But he also felt the weight of Pierce's warning. That night, he showed it to Sam. Sam stared at the pages for a long time before speaking. I thought this was gone forever. I can get it out there, Jaden said. Social media, local news, Sam shook his head. It's not that simple. You think Halloran doesn't have people in all those places? They'll bury it, same as they did before. And they'll make sure you pay for trying. I don't care. You will, Sam said quietly. When it's not just you paying, Jaden met his eyes. Then we make it so they can't bury it. We go big, bigger than Riverton. Sam didn't answer, but Shadow lifted his head, watching Jaden with those steady amber eyes, as if weighing him to. The next day at school, Jaden's locker was dented in, a fresh scrape of paint gouged out. Inside, his books were scattered, and taped to the door was a piece of paper. Stop digging. He yanked it down, shoving it into his bag. Whoever had done it knew exactly what he was working on and wanted him scared. It didn't work. It just made the fire burn hotter. That evening, Jaden headed to the park to clear his head. Sam wasn't there, but Shadow was alone, lying in the grass. Where's Sam, boy? Jaden crouched to scratch his neck. That's when he saw it, a thin red line along Shadow's left flank, where the fur had been shaved and stitched. Not a bad wound, but fresh. Shadow leaned into his hand, but Jaden felt the tremor in the dog's muscles. Someone hurt you, he whispered. A voice behind him said, consider it a warning. Jaden spun around. The tall blonde from the park, the one who'd cornered Sam, was standing there, smirking. Stay out of things you don't understand, kid. People like you get chewed up. Jaden's anger surged. You touch him again, you'll what? The blonde stepped closer. Tell your war hero friends. They're the past. This city's moving on. He turned and walked away before Jaden could reply. Jaden looked down at Shadow, who met his gaze silently. It was all the confirmation he needed. This wasn't just about the past anymore. It was war. Jaden didn't go home that night. Instead, he took the long way across town, hood up, backpack slung tight against his shoulders. His mind was a constant loop. Marcus's commendation, Pierce's warning, Shadow's wound, the blonde kid's smirk. It all fed into one conclusion. This wasn't going to stop unless he forced it into the light. And there was only one man who could blow the whole thing open, Rick Halloran. He found him at the Riverton Athletic Club, the kind of place that smelled like money even after hours. Through the glass doors, Jaden spotted Rick in the lobby, shaking hands with a city councilman. His coat was draped over his arm, his tie loosened, but he still looked like he belonged to a different world. Jaden pushed the door open and walked straight toward him. Rick noticed immediately, his smile tightening. "You've developed a habit of turning up where you don't belong." "I need to talk to you," Jaden said. Rick glanced at the councilman. "Give us a minute, Tom." When they were alone, Jaden pulled the envelope from his bag and slid the folded papers out just enough for Rick to see the heading. Recommendation for Medal of Honor, Marcus Ellsworth. For the first time since Jaden had met him, Rick's mask cracked. His eyes flicked to the signature at the bottom, then back to Jaden's face. "Where did you get this?" His voice was low, but it had lost its smoothness. "Doesn't matter. It's real, and you know what it means." Rick's jaw tightened. "It means nothing without the original file. It means you and your family buried a hero because he didn't fit your idea of one." Rick's gaze sharpened. "Careful. Jaden. Step closer. No, you be careful. Because I'm going to make sure everyone in this city knows who Marcus was and what you did to him." For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Rick took the papers, studied them, and handed them back. "You have no idea the kind of fire you're playing with," he said. "Marcus wasn't erased because of me, but my father. He made decisions. The kind that don't get reversed without breaking more than a few bones." "Then help me break them," Jaden said. Rick's eyes narrowed. "Why should I?" "Because you keep showing up," Jaden said. "At the grave, at the park, at the hospital. You could have stayed out of this. But you didn't." Rick's gaze held for a long beat. Then he sighed and put on his coat. "Meet me tomorrow, 9 a.m., my office. If you're late, the door stays closed." Jaden didn't tell Sam about the meeting, not yet. He didn't want to raise hopes he couldn't deliver on. Instead, he spent the night scanning the commendation into a digital file, making 3 copies on 3 different flash drives. One went into his backpack, one into the lining of his jacket, and one under the floorboard in his room. If they were going to come after him, he wasn't going to make it easy. Rick's office was on the 12th floor of the Halloran building. All glass and steel, with a view of the river that made Riverton look almost beautiful. Jaden sat in a leather chair across from Rick's desk, feeling the weight of the city pressing in from all sides. "I did some digging," Rick began, leaning back. "The original file still exists in the National Personnel Records Center, but it's flagged as restricted. That means someone high up had it sealed. Getting it unsealed would take an act of Congress or a miracle." Jaden frowned. "So we find a different way." Rick shook his head. "Kid, you think you're the first to try? My father had allies in the military, in the press, in politics. Most of them are retired now. But the ones who aren't? They know how to keep things buried." "Then why are you even telling me this?" "Because," Rick said slowly, "part of me thinks Marcus got a raw deal. And part of me's tired of living in my father's shadow." Jaden studied him. "So which part wins?" Rick didn't answer right away. Then he reached into a drawer and pulled out a small black notebook, sliding it across the desk. "Contacts. Old veterans, journalists, a couple of city officials. Who aren't bought yet. If you're going to try, you'll need them." Jaden took the notebook carefully. "Why give this to me?" "Because you're too stubborn to stop, and I'd rather see you armed than crushed." For the next week, Jaden and Sam began working through the list. Some people hung up the moment they heard Marcus's name. Others listened, then told them they'd already tried and failed. But a few were willing to talk. One was a retired Army medic in Chicago who remembered patching up Shadow after the ambush. Another was a war correspondent who'd been in Da Nang the week Marcus died, but whose article had been heavily edited before print. Every story added weight to the truth Jaden was building. And then came the night of the break-in. Jaden came home late from the library to find the apartment door ajar. Inside, drawers were pulled open, papers scattered. His mother was fine shaken, but unharmed. Nothing major was stolen, except his backpack, the one with one of the flash drives inside. The police wrote it up as a burglary, but Jaden knew better. This was a warning, one more shove to get him to back off. Instead, it had the opposite effect. The next morning, he called Rick. "We go public now." Rick was silent for a moment. "You sure you're ready for that?" "I'm not the one who needs to be ready," Jaden said. "They are." The plan came together faster than Jaden expected. Rick arranged a meeting with a local journalist named Carla Mendez. She ran an independent news site, small, but respected, and more importantly, not under the thumb of the Halloran family. They met in the back booth of a diner just off the interstate, the blinds half drawn against the winter sun. Carla listened in silence as Jaden laid out the story. He showed her the scanned commendation, the testimonies from Pierce, Frank, the medic, and the war correspondent. She read each page carefully, her expression sharpening. "This is solid," she said finally, "but it's going to be ugly. They'll come after you, discredit you, dig into your life." Jaden nodded. "I don't care." Rick's gaze flicked to him but stayed silent. Carla closed her folder. "Give me a week, I'll fact-check, corroborate, and then we'll publish. Once it's out there, it'll spread." The week felt longer than any Jaden had lived through. At school, whispers followed him in the hall. His locker was dented again, though nothing was taken this time. Sam kept telling him to keep his head down, but Jaden couldn't. He spent every night at the kitchen table with his mother, going over what might happen when the story hit. Denise listened quietly, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "You're going to make enemies, Jay," she said one night. "I already have." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Just don't forget who you are in all this." The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Carla's headline hit the front page of her site at 7:04 a.m. "Hero without a flag. The forgotten bravery of Marcus Ellsworth." The article was meticulous: dates, names, quotes from living witnesses, scans of the commendation, the rescind order, side by side, photos of Marcus in uniform, with Shadow at his side. Carla didn't pull punches. She named the officers who'd blocked the medal, and she traced the political connection straight to Robert Halloran. By noon, the story had been shared thousands of times. Larger outlets picked it up. Twitter was on fire with the hashtag flag for Marcus. Jaden watched it all from Sam's apartment, the two of them crowded around an old laptop. Shadow dozed at their feet, oblivious to the storm outside. "This is it," Jaden said. "They can't ignore it now." Sam didn't answer right away. "They can't ignore it," he agreed. "But they can fight it." By mid-afternoon, the counterattack began. A statement from the Halloran Foundation called the article misleading and politically motivated. Anonymous accounts on social media began posting claims that Marcus had been insubordinate and reckless, endangering his platoon. Then came the smear on Jaden himself, a post on a local forum accusing him of fabricating evidence and associating with known troublemakers. Known troublemakers? Jaden scoffed when he saw it. "They mean Sam," Sam shrugged. "Comes with the territory." That night, as they were walking back from the diner, a black SUV slowed alongside them. The tinted window rolled down just enough for a voice to call out, "Go home, kid." Then the SUV pulled away, tires spitting slush. Jaden felt the knot in his stomach tighten. "They're watching." "They've been watching," Sam said. "Now they're just letting you know." The next day, Carla called with an update. I've had 2 advertisers pull out. People are leaning on me to take the story down. I'm not going to, but you need to be careful. This is bigger than I thought. Rick also called. You're trending nationwide. That's good and bad. There's talk of a city council motion to formally recognize Marcus. But there's also talk of blocking it. Then we keep pushing. Jaden said. Rick hesitated. You're not the only one they can hurt, Jaden. Remember that. That evening, Jaden's mother came home to find an envelope taped to their door. Inside was a single Polaroid, Shadow, lying in the park. Across the bottom, in black marker, was written, "Next time, he won't get up." Jaden's hands shook as he showed it to Sam. "This is them telling us they're done playing nice," Sam said. His voice was low, dangerous. "We can't stop now," Jaden said. "No," Sam agreed. "We can't." By Friday, the momentum was undeniable. The hashtag flag for Marcus had been picked up by veterans groups, civil rights organizations, and even a few celebrities. Pressure on the city council mounted. There was talk of a rally at the park, in front of the war memorial, but with the support came more threats, messages to Carla, anonymous calls to Rick's office. Someone spray painting "traitor" on Sam's bench in the park. Jaden could feel it building, the sense that something was going to break, one way or another. Late that night, as snow began to fall, he sat with Sam and Rick in Sam's small apartment. The laptop screen glowed between them, showing a draft of the speech they planned to give at the rally. Rick leaned back. "You realize they might try to shut this down before it even happens." "Let them try," Sam said. Rick looked at Jaden. "If they do, it's going to get messy. No guarantees anyone walks away clean." Jaden met his gaze. "Then we make sure it's worth it." Rick held his eyes for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right, we go all in." The morning of the rally dawned gray and bitterly cold. Snow from the night before still clung to the grass in the park, turning the war memorial's base into a ring of white dot. By the time Jaden arrived with Sam and Shadow, a small crowd had already gathered. Veterans in heavy coats, students clutching homemade signs, parents with kids bundled in scarves. Carla was there with her camera, and Rick stood off to the side, scanning the edges of the park with a wary eye. The signs read things like, "Honor all heroes," "Justice for Marcus," and of course, #flag for Marcus. Jaden felt a tremor of nerves run through him. This had started as questions in his head, a grave without a flag. Now it was bodies in the cold, people holding banners, voices ready to speak. Sam stepped up to the small platform they'd set up in front of the memorial. His voice carried, rough but steady. 53 years ago, Marcus Ellsworth saved my life. He saved the lives of 12 men that night. And for that, he was buried without honor, because some people decided his bravery didn't fit their picture of a hero. A ripple of anger moved through the crowd. "He deserved more than this," Sam went on. "He deserved truth. He deserved a flag. And today, we're here to say his name so no one can take it from us again." The applause was loud and sharp. In the cold air, Jaden stepped forward next, his hands gripping the edges of the podium. "I'm 14 years old," he began. "I never met Marcus Ellsworth, but I met the people he saved. I've heard their stories. I've read the proof. And I know that if someone like him can be forgotten, then any of us can. That's why this matters." The crowd was quiet now, leaning in. "They told me to stop digging. They tried to scare me. They even hurt this dog right here." He gestured to Shadow, who stood beside him, ears pricked. "Because they thought it would make me back down. But we don't back down when it's about the truth." A cheer went up, loud enough to echo against the buildings around the park. Rick was next. He didn't stand at the podium. He stood on the ground, facing the crowd directly. "My father was part of the system that failed Marcus Ellsworth," he said, his voice low but clear. "I can't change what he did, but I can tell the truth about it." and I can stand here with you to demand this city do right by him." The crowd surged forward, clapping, chanting Marcus's name. It felt like a turning point. The first snowflake hit Jaden's cheek just as the shouting started. From the far side of the park, a group of men in dark jackets was pushing through. The crowd, knocking signs aside. The blonde from the park was at the front, his smirk gone, replaced by something harder. "Break it up!" One of them barked. They weren't police. Jaden knew that instantly. No badges, no uniforms. Just muscle. Carla swung her camera toward them, snapping photos. One of the men lunged for her, but Sam stepped between them, shadow snarling, teeth bared. The crowd wavered, some people shouting back, others pulling their kids away. Rick moved fast, getting between Jaden and the approaching men. "Stay behind." "Me," the blonde pointed straight at Jaden. "You time to go." "No," Jaden said, his voice louder than he expected. "Not until the flag's on that grave." The man's jaw tightened. He took a step forward, and then the wail of sirens split the air. 3 police cruisers pulled up on the street bordering the park. Uniformed officers spilled out, shouting for people to move back. The men in dark jackets hesitated, then began melting away into the crowd, vanishing as quickly as they'd come. One officer, a tall woman with a braid under her cap, made her way to the platform. "We got an anonymous tip there might be trouble here," she said. "Looks like you handled it." Jaden's pulse was still racing, but the danger had passed for now. The rally went on, though the energy was different, more defiant than celebratory. By the end of the day, Carla's photos and video clips were already online, the confrontation caught from multiple angles. It only added fuel to the fire. That night, Jaden walked home with Sam and Rick. Shadow trotted between them, tail low. "But steady, you made your stand today," Rick said. "They're going to hit back harder." "Then we'll hit back too," Jaden said. Rick glanced down at him. "Careful, kid. This isn't over. It's just beginning." Jaden looked toward the memorial, now silent in the dark. Snowflakes spun in the streetlights like falling ash. He thought of Marcus, of the commendation, of the people who had shown up today despite the risk. He thought of the men in dark jackets, and how they'd known exactly where to find him. And he knew Rick was right. By the time he reached his building, the snow was falling heavier. On the front door, taped in the exact same spot as before, was a fresh envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, blank except for 3 words typed neatly in the center. "Last warning. Kid." Jaden looked at Sam, who read it and said nothing. Shadow pressed close to his leg, warm against the cold. Whatever came next, Jaden understood one thing with absolute clarity. They were done warning him. The next move would be action. The envelope sat on the kitchen table like a live wire. Jaden hadn't touched it since handing it to Sam. His mother stood at the sink, rinsing dishes, but her eyes kept flicking toward it. She didn't have to read it. She could feel the weight of the threat in the air. "You need to stop," she said finally, her voice low. "This isn't a schoolyard fight anymore." Jaden looked up from his chair. "If we stop, they win. If you don't, they could hurt you, or worse." Sam, sitting across from him with Shadow curled at his feet, broke the silence. "She's right, kid. They're not bluffing. The next step is to make an example of you." "I'm not scared," Jaden said. Sam leaned forward. "Doesn't matter if you're scared. It matters if you're alive to finish what you started." Jaden's mother slammed a plate into the drying rack harder than she meant to. "This isn't your job, Jaden. Let someone else fight this." Jaden met her eyes. "No one else is fighting it." The days after the rally were tense. The story was still spreading. National outlets were picking it up now, but so were the counter-narratives. TV segments featured military analysts questioning Marcus's judgment that night in Da Nang. Online trolls flooded the hashtag flag for Marcus. Hashtag with racist slurs and conspiracy theories. Carla's website was hit with a DDoS attack, forcing her offline for 2 days. Rick's office received a bomb threat that turned out to be fake, but the building was evacuated anyway. And then came the accident. It was late afternoon when Sam called Jaden. "Shadow's gone," he said, his voice tight. Jaden's heart dropped. "What do you mean gone?" "Somebody broke into my place, left the door open. He must have chased them." Jaden was already pulling on his jacket. "I'm coming." They searched until nightfall, checking alleys, side streets, the park. The cold bit at their faces, and each time they called his name, the wind seemed to carry it away. Just after midnight, they found him limping out from behind a dumpster, a gash along his shoulder, eyes dull with exhaustion. Jaden dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around him. "They're trying to break you," Sam said, his voice like gravel. "And they're using him to do it." 2 days later, Rick called an emergency meeting at his office. Jaden, Sam, Carla, and Frank Dawson sat around the polished conference table while Rick stood at the head. "They've escalated," Rick said, "which means they're scared. But it also means they're going to get more reckless." Carla tapped her pen against her notebook. "We need to make the next move before they do." Frank lit a cigarette, ignoring the no smoking sign. "We take it to the feds." "They can't bury it if it's in Washington," Rick shook his head. "They'll stall it in committee until we're all dead." "No, we need public pressure so big it forces the council's hand." Jaden leaned forward. "Then we go bigger than Riverton. We organize rallies in every city where Marcus served. We get veterans groups to back us, civil rights groups. 2. Make it impossible to ignore." Sam looked at him. "That's a hell of a lot of ground to cover." "Then we start now," Jaden said. The next week was a blur of calls, emails, and planning. Rick's notebook of contacts became a lifeline introductions to veteran organizations in Chicago, Detroit, Atlanta. Carla coordinated media outreach. Frank worked the phones with old Army buddies. Shadow recovered quickly, though the stitches on his shoulder were a constant reminder of how far their enemies would go. Every night, Jaden's mother waited up for him, her worry etched deep, but she didn't tell him to stop again. She just made sure there was food on the table when he came in. 3 weeks later, they were ready. The largest rally was set for Riverton, with simultaneous events in 6 other cities. Local news was already calling it the Flag March. On the morning of the march, the air buzzed with anticipation. The park was packed, hundreds of people, banners waving, music blaring from portable speakers. Veterans in full dress uniforms stood shoulder to shoulder with high school students in hoodies. Jaden stood near the front with Sam and Rick, Shadow pressed to his side. Carla was everywhere at once, camera clicking. Frank smoked just outside. The crowd, scanning for trouble. Rick leaned toward Jaden. "You've done something most adults couldn't pull off." Jaden smiled faintly. "Not done yet." The speeches began, stories of Marcus's bravery, calls for justice. The crowd roared with each one. Then Jaden stepped up to the microphone. "We're here because a man who gave everything was given nothing," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "We're here because the truth matters more than the people who try to hide it." The cheers rose, but beneath them, Jaden caught movement at the edge of the park. Dark jackets, pushing through the crowd. Sam saw them too. "They're here, before." Jaden could react. A firecracker went off near the stage loud enough to sound like a gunshot. The crowd jolted, people screaming, scattering. In the chaos, the men in dark jackets surged forward. The first firecracker still echoed in Jaden's ears when the second one went off closer this time, sending a fresh wave of panic through the crowd. Parents yanked their kids toward the park gates. Veterans barked orders to each other, and the sea of bodies became a frantic current. Sam was already moving, stepping in front of Jaden as the men in dark jackets closed the distance. Shadow pressed against Sam's leg, teeth bared, hackles up. "Get him out of here." Carla's voice cut through the noise. She was shoving her camera into a messenger bag, eyes darting between Jaden and the approaching men. "I'm not leaving." Jaden said, heart pounding. You will if you want to finish this, Sam snapped. His gaze never left the advancing line. Go with Rick, now. Rick appeared on Jaden's right, grabbing his arm. Come on, kid. The blonde, the same one who'd threatened Jaden in the park weeks ago, stepped forward, eyes locked on him. Brave little hero, he sneered over the chaos. Let's see how brave you are up close. Rick shifted, putting himself fully between Jaden and the blonde. Not today. The blonde's smirk sharpened. You think you can hide him forever? This city belongs to us. Not anymore, Rick said, and there was something in his tone cold. Final that made even the blonde hesitate. Then someone in the crowd yelled, He's got a knife. Jaden caught the glint of steel in the hand of one of the men pushing forward. Sam reacted instantly. Shadow lunged, clamping onto the man's wrist. The knife clattered to the ground as the man screamed and tried to wrench free. 2 veterans nearby moved in, hauling the man back into the throng. But the chaos didn't stop another shove. A loud crash as one of the sound speakers toppled, and a woman went down hard on the ice. Jaden tried to push forward to help, but Rick's grip tightened. We're leaving now. They moved through the thinning crowd, Carla falling in behind them, snapping photos over her shoulder. Sam and Shadow flanked the rear, keeping the men in dark jackets at bay just long enough for them to reach the street. Police sirens wailed in the distance, real ones this time, not firecrackers. A pair of squad cars screeched to a halt at the park entrance, officers spilling out, some with hands on their holsters. The men in dark jackets scattered, disappearing into side streets like smoke. Jaden stopped, chest heaving, and looked back toward the memorial. It still stood, silent amid the churned-up snow and trampled signs. But something felt different now, not untouchable. Not theirs. For the first time, he thought maybe the people who had tried to bury Marcus's story were starting to lose their grip. Back at Sam's apartment, the adrenaline finally wore off. Shadow lay on the floor, tongue lolling, still keyed up from the fight. Sam checked him over carefully, murmuring to him like you would to an old friend. Rick stood by the window, watching the street below. They're not going to stop, he sighed. Not after today. Jaden dropped into a chair. Then neither are we. Rick turned, studying him for a long moment. You're going to have to make a choice soon, Jaden. Keep going, and this won't just be about Marcus anymore. They'll come for you, your mom, everyone who stands next to you. Jaden met his eyes. If I quit now, Marcus stays buried. And they win. Rick's jaw tightened. Then we'd better make sure they don't. The next morning, Carla's photos hit the news, clear shots of the blonde brandishing a knife, Shadow mid-lunge, the chaos in the park. They went viral. People demanded arrests. The city council called an emergency session, but tucked into Jaden's mailbox that afternoon was another envelope. No threats this time, just a single photograph. Marcus Ellsworth, in uniform, shaking hands with a young Robert Halloran. On the back, in neat block letters, it started here. Jaden felt the chill run down his spine. Whoever sent it wasn't just watching, they knew exactly which wound to press. The photo of Marcus and Robert Halloran sat in the middle of Sam's kitchen table, like a puzzle piece from a box no one wanted to open. Jaden turned it over in his hands for the 100th time, running his thumb along the neat block letters. IT started here. Rick was leaning against the counter, arms folded. That's from my father's first campaign, he said quietly. He used Marcus as a photo op, made speeches about unity while planning to cut him out the moment it suited him. Sam's jaw flexed, the lines in his face deepening. So this isn't just about the military, it's about your family. Rick nodded once, and the city they built. Jaden set the photo down. Then let's finish it. The days that followed moved fast. Carla's photos from the rally had sparked more than outrage. They'd put real pressure on the city council. Veterans groups from across the country were flooding their offices with calls. The hashtag flag for Marcus was trending worldwide. Rick worked his remaining political contacts, pushing for a formal recognition ceremony. Sam spoke at local radio stations, telling Marcus's story again and again, each time with the same quiet conviction. Jaden coordinated online campaigns after school, connecting with supporters in other states. But the threats didn't stop. Twice, Jaden spotted the blonde watching from across the street. Shadow growled every time. And one night, someone spray-painted traitors across the memorial's base. Volunteers scrubbed it clean by morning. A week later, the city council voted. It passed by one vote. Marcus Ellsworth would be officially recognized as a hero. His name would be added to the memorial, and a flag placed on his grave. The ceremony was set for the following Saturday. The morning of the ceremony, the cemetery was quiet except for the soft crunch of snow underfoot. Rows of headstones stretched out in every direction, each marked with a small American flag fluttering in the winter wind, except for one. Until today. Jaden stood between Sam and his mother as the mayor spoke into a microphone. The words carried thin on the cold air. And today, we correct a wrong too long left unrighted. Marcus Ellsworth's bravery, his sacrifice, and his service will no longer be forgotten. The mayor stepped back. A uniformed honor guard moved forward, precise and silent, carrying a folded flag. They knelt, placing it at the base of Marcus's headstone. Then, in one motion, they fixed the small pole into the frozen ground and let the flag unfurl. Red, white, blue, finally where it belonged. Jaden's throat tightened. He glanced at Sam, whose eyes stayed on the flag, his jaw working like he was holding back words that didn't need to be said. Shadow sat at Sam's side, gaze fixed on the grave, ears lifted against the wind. Rick stood a few steps back, hands in his coat pockets. He caught Jaden's eye and gave a small nod, respectful, unguarded. The crowd was silent for a long moment. Then someone began to clap. It spread, soft at first, then building, rolling over the cemetery like a wave. After the ceremony, people lingered, leaving flowers, small tokens, quiet words. Jaden stayed until the crowd thinned, then stepped forward and placed the photo, the one of Marcus and Robert Halloran, against the base of the stone. "He's not in your shadow anymore," he said quietly. Sam laid a hand on his shoulder. "Neither are you." As they walked back toward the gates, a figure stood near the tree line, half in shadow, the blonde. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Jaden met his gaze, and for the first time, didn't look away. The man smirked faintly before turning and disappearing into the trees. That night, Jaden sat at his desk writing. Not for school, not for Carla's sight, just for himself. Marcus Ellsworth was a hero. The kind of hero who doesn't wait for orders to do the right thing. They tried to bury him, but you can't bury the truth forever. It will push through, even in frozen ground. He closed the notebook and looked out the window. The flag at the cemetery would be catching the same wind now, its colors cutting against the winter sky. Some battles never really end. But for today, one had been one. And that was enough to keep going. The photo of Marcus and Robert Halloran sat in the middle of Sam's kitchen table like a wound that had finally been reopened. Jaden kept turning it over in his hands, feeling the ridges of the old print. The neat block letters on the back, "IT started here," looked almost like they'd been typed on an old police typewriter. The ink faint in places. Rick stood by the window, looking out at the street like he half expected the men in dark jackets to be parked outside. "That was my father's first campaign," he said finally. He used Marcus's face to sell an idea of unity he never believed in. A black war hero shaking hands with a white politician. That photo won him a lot of votes. And then, he made sure Marcus disappeared from the story. Sam's hand tightened on his coffee mug. "Your father took the one thing Marcus couldn't defend, his name, and he stripped it bare." Rick didn't argue. "And I've been standing in that shadow my whole life." Jaden put the photo down carefully. Then it's time to step out of it. The next week was a blur of movement. Rick worked the phones, calling in favors he hadn't touched in years. Carla kept feeding the story online, posting testimonies from veterans who had served with Marcus. Sam recorded a long, unflinching interview for a national veterans podcast, his voice breaking only once, when he talked about the last time he saw Marcus alive. Jaden became the point of contact for the flood of emails pouring in. There were notes from families Marcus had helped back home, from soldiers who'd been inspired by his story, even though they'd never met him. There were also threats still, but they were drowned out by the sheer volume of people demanding the same thing, a flag for Marcus. The city council session was standing room only. Jaden sat beside Sam in the back, Rick at the end of the row, hands folded tight. One by one, council members spoke, some cautious, some openly defiant about overturning what had been done half a century ago. When the vote came, Jaden felt his chest tighten. 5-4. It passed. Sam's shoulders sagged. Rick let out a long, quiet breath. Jaden didn't cheer. He just closed his eyes for a moment, holding the weight of it. The morning of the ceremony, Riverton Cemetery was hushed under a thin layer of snow. The winter sun was pale, but it caught on the small American flags marking every veteran's grave, all except one. Until now, the crowd was bigger than Jaden expected. Veterans in uniform stood at attention. Families clutched flowers. Carla moved quietly between them, taking photos but not intruding. The mayor spoke, but Jaden barely heard the words. He was watching the honor guard step forward, flag folded, sharp and precise in their white-gloved hands. They knelt, pressed the base into the frozen ground, and let it unfurl, red, blue. For a moment, no one moved. The flag caught the wind, snapping once, as if announcing itself. Sam's eyes stayed fixed on it. He finally got it, he said, voice rough. Shadow sat perfectly still beside him, tail curled around his paws. Rick stood a little apart, but when Jaden looked over, their eyes met. Rick didn't smile, but he nodded just once, and in that gesture was something like peace. After the speeches, people drifted forward to leave flowers and tokens. Jaden waited until the crowd thinned, then stepped up and set the photo, Marcus shaking Robert Halloran's hand against the headstone. He's not in your shadow anymore, Jaden said quietly. Sam put a hand on his shoulder. Neither are you. They stood there for a while, the cold biting at their fingers, watching the flag move in the wind. As they walked back toward the gate, Jaden caught movement near the tree line. The blond man. No jacket this time, just a hoodie, hands in his pockets. He was watching, no smirk, no words, just that same fixed gaze. Jaden didn't look away. After a long moment, the man turned and disappeared into the trees. That night, Jaden sat at his desk, the notebook open in front of him. He began to write. Marcus Ellsworth was a hero. Not because of medals, not because of speeches, but because when it mattered most, he ran toward danger, not away from it. They tried to erase him. They almost succeeded. But the truth is like the flag that flies over his grave now. It might get torn, it might get hidden, but it doesn't stop being what it is. He closed the notebook and looked out the window. Somewhere out there, in the quiet snow, the flag was still flying. Some battles didn't end with a ceremony. Some never ended at all. But today, one had been won. And for Jaden Brooks, that was enough to keep fighting. Asterisk, today, a flag flies over Marcus Ellsworth's grave. It doesn't erase the years of silence, but it means he is no longer forgotten. And it means those who fought for him, in war and in memory, didn't fight in vain. Some battles never make it to the front page. Some heroes never get their parade. But the fight for justice starts with a single voice, and grows when others join in. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe, share it, and be part of the next chapter, because the truth deserves witnesses. And Marcus Ellsworth. deserves to be remembered.